the confusion of languages. The sequence of events as presented in the book of Genesis places the catastrophe of Babel next after the deluge. And the whole land was of one language and of one speech. And they said, Let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they will have all one language.
Let us go down and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech.
So the Lord scattered them abroad from the face of the earth. Is that the beginning of the Great Schism? The rabbinical sources explain that the purpose of the tower was to secure a shelter the city of Babel
in case the deluge should occur another time.
The men who were before us God has destroyed with a deluge. If he shall think again fit to be wroth with us, and seek to destroy us even with a deluge, we shall all perish to a man. But come, let us prepare bricks and burn them with fire, and they may withstand the waters. And building them together with asphalt, let us make a high tower, the top of which shall reach to heaven, in order that being delivered from the deluge, we may find safety in the tower. The purpose of the builders is found also in an account of this catastrophe, which the Aborigines of Central America transmitted from generation to generation. Ixtosecatl, after narrating the story of the deluge, which brought to a close the first world age, Atanasia, and destroy most of mankind, described the catastrophe, which ended the second age, or Atacanasia, the son of wind. And as men were therefore multiplying, they constructed a very high and strong Zakuali, which means a very high tower, in order to protect themselves when again the second world should be destroyed.
At a crucial moment, their languages were changed.
And as they did not understand one another, they went into different parts of the world. The same author also gives another version of the same catastrophe. When 1,715 years had passed since the deluge, men were destroyed by a violent hurricane, Hurricane, which carried off trees, mountains, houses, and people, great buildings, although many men and women escaped, especially those that were able to take refuge in caves and places where this great hurricane could not reach. Similarly, wrote Gomorrah, circa 1510 to 1560. The wind which occurred at that time was so great and of such force that it overthrew all the buildings and trees and even broke mountains apart. That's got to be some wind, man. Many of the sources which recount the destruction of the Tower of Babel maintain, in close accord with the Mexican account, that the catastrophe was caused by a violent wind. Thus, the Sibyl is said to have prophesied, when are fulfilled the threats of the great God with which he threatened men, when formerly in an Assyrian land they built a tower, and all were of one speech, and wished to rise even till they climbed unto the starry heaven. Then the immortal raised a mighty wind, and laid upon them strong necessity. For when the wind threw down the mighty tower, then rose among mankind fierce strife and hate. One speech was changed into many dialects, and earth was filled with divers tribes and kings. In the book of Jubilees, it is said that the Lord sent a mighty wind against the tower and overthrew it upon the earth. The Babylonian account, as transmitted by Abidenis, tells that once men built a high tower where now is Babylon. When it was already close to heaven, the gods sent winds and ruined the entire scheme, and men, having till then been all of the same speech, received now from the gods many languages. Other accounts give the impression that a strong electrical discharge, possibly from an overcharged ionosphere, found a contact body in the high structure. According to a tradition known to the 12th century traveler Benjamin of Tudela, fire from heaven fell in the midst of the tower and broke it asunder. In the tractate Sanhedrin of the Babylonian Talmud, it is said, a third of the tower was burnt, a third sank into the earth, and a third is still standing. The Tower of Babel story was found in the most remote parts of the world prior to the arrival of missionaries. In those places, thus before the biblical account became known to the Aborigines. For instance, on the island of Hao, part of the Pumatu or Tamotu Islands in Polynesia. The people used to tell that after a great flood, the sons of Rata, who survived, made an attempt to erect a building by which they could reach the sky and see the creator god, Vata or Atia. But the god in anger chased the builders away, broke down the building, and changed their language, so that they spoke diverse tongues. The question of biblical influence was discussed by the folklorist. They, the natives of Hao, declared that this tradition existed already with their ancestors, before the arrival of the Europeans. I leave to them the responsibility for this declaration. All I can certify is that this tradition contains many ancient words, which today are no longer understood by the natives. Papa Vu, the sacred book of the Kish Mayas, narrates that the language of all the families that were gathered at Tulan was confused and none could understand the speech of the others. The Casca Indian story makes the result into the cause. The Indians narrate that a great darkness came on, and high winds which drove the vessels hither and thither. The people became separated. Some were driven away. Long afterwards, when in their wanderings they met people from another place, they spoke different languages and could not understand one another. With this exception, the Casca story may refer to any great upheaval and is actually an effect of large-scale migrations. The traditions of the peoples make the catastrophe the immediate cause of the confusion of languages and the dispersion as well, while the account in Genesis and that given by Abydos and various other sources connect the story with a certain place in Mesopotamia. The traditions localize it in many different countries. In each case, the entire population of the world is said to have been affected.
If the nature of the catastrophe was cosmic, the same occurrence could have taken place in different countries. In this case, the existence of similar traditions
in many corners of the globe is of no avail for tracing the migration of ancient tribes. The Arabic tradition makes South Arabia the scene of the upheaval, followed by the confusion of languages and migrations. Similar experiences could have been brought about by one and the same cause in many places. It appears that after the flood of the plain of Mesopotamia became one of the few cultural centers in the world, another flood would have caused the utter destruction of the human race. And this was feared because the memory of the flood a few centuries earlier was very vivid. Observations of the movements of the heavenly bodies may have provided a warning of a new catastrophe, and large structures were built for refuge. But when the event came,
the structures were overwhelmed, were destroyed by hurricanes and powerful electric discharges.
In the rabbinical concept of the seven earths, molded out of one another in successive catastrophes, the generation which built the Tower of Babel inhabited the fourth earth, but it goes on to the fifth earth, where the men became oblivious of their origin and home. Those who built the Tower of Babel are told to forget their language. This generation is called the people who lost their memory. The earth which they inhabited was the fifth earth, that of oblivion, amnesia. In the ancient Mexican traditions, that it is told that those who survived the catastrophe of Son of Wind lost their reason and speech. The characteristic of this catastrophe was its influence upon the mental or mnemonic capacity of the peoples. The description of, as told by many tribes and peoples, if it contains authentic features, or arouses the surmise that the Earth underwent an electromagnetic disturbance, and that the human race experienced something that in modern terms seems like a consequence of a deep electrical shock, I'll say. The application of electrical current to the head of a human being often results in a partial loss of memory. Also, a loss of speech may be induced by the application of electrodes to specified areas of the brain. Some of the sources assert that the builders of the tower feared a world conflagration. Similarly, the sacred writings of the Burmese relate that when the world is destroyed by wind, the wind begins to blow and gradually increases. At first it only raises sand and small stones, but at length it whirls about immense rocks and the summits of mountains. F. Buchanan on the Religion and Literature of the Burmese. The order of the Sun Ages of the ancient Mexicans is given differently by different authors, but the most reliable of the sources, the Vatican Codex, wonder why it's the Vatican. What would they know about Mexico? Ixtlilxochitl and Venetia all agree that Echinacea, or the Son of Wind, was the second age, following after the Son of Water, or Echinacea. The tradition that fire from heaven destroyed the tower is also a feature of some of the Mesoamerican accounts. The legend recorded by Pedro de los Rios concerning the foundation of the pyramid, Cholula, told you about them pyramids,
Cholula,
in Mexico, after the waters of the deluge had recorded. One of the survivors, Cholula, where he began to build a large structure. It was his to raise the mighty edifice to the clouds. But the gods, offended at his presumption, hurled the fire of heaven down on the pyramid. Many of the workmen perished, and the building remained unfinished. Fraser adds that it is said that at a time of Spanish conquest the inhabitants of Cholula preserved with great veneration a large aerolite, which according to them was the very thunderbolt that fell on the pyramid and set it on fire. Another Mexican tradition recorded by Diego Duran in 1579 tells of giants who built a tower that almost reached the heavens when it was destroyed by a thunderbolt. The tradition was among those collected Cayo in 1912 or 1913. His publication contains the story in the original Polynesian and in a French translation. The question of whether the Greeks transmitted an account of the same events was debated by several writers in antiquity, including Philo of Alexandria, Cyril of Alexandria, and Origen. The writers saw a link between the story of the revolt of the giants and the sons of Alois, who piled Ossa upon Olympus, and Pelion atop Ossa in a vain effort to reach the lofty dwelling of Zeus and make a war on the gods, and the account of the construction of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11:3-8. The earliest allusion to these events is in Homer's Odyssey. Homer ascribes the destruction of the giants to Apollo. Pliny and Macrobius, Saturn 1:19-7, identified Apollo with the planet Mercury. That Mercury and Apollo were alternate names for Stilben, the planet Mercury. Hesiod ascribed the battle with the giants as an immense catastrophe involving the earth and heaven alike. The boundless sea rang terribly abound, and the earth crashed loudly. Wide heaven was shaken and groaned, and high Olympus reeled from its foundations under the charge of the undying gods. And a heavy quaking reached Tartarus. The cry of both armies as they shouted reached to starry heaven. Then Zeus no longer held back his might, but straight his heart was filled with fury, and he showed forth all his strength. From heaven and from Olympus he came forthwith, hurling his lightning. The bolts flew thick and fast from his strong hand, together with thunder and lightning whirling with awesome flame. The life-giving earth crashed around in burning, and the vast wood cracked loud with fire all about, and the land seethed, oceans, streams, and the unfruitful sea. The hot vapor lapped round the earthborn Titans. Flame unspeakable rose to the bright upper air. The flashing glare of the thunder shone, and lightning blinded their eyes, for all that they were strong. It seems as if earth and wide heaven above came together, for such a mighty crash would have arisen if the earth were being hurled to ruin, and heaven from on high were hurling her down. Also the winds brought rumbling earthquake and dust storm, thunder and lightning, and the lurid thunderbolt, which are the shafts of great Zeus. Seneca also referred to the same events in mentioning Jupiter's thunderbolts, by which the threefold mass of mountains fell, and a tradition held that this was the first occasion on which Jupiter used his bolts. Ovid, Fasti 3. The pagans disputed with the Jews and Christians whether Moses took the story from Homer or Homer from Moses, but the common origin of the two accounts was generally conceded. The early writer, Eupolemus, drew on both sources in asserting that the city of Babylon had been founded by those who saved themselves from the deluge. They were giants, and they built the famous tower, Vesuvius. From the viewpoint of sequential chronology, the link is plausible. The giants' revolt is said to have occurred not long after Zeus had taken over from Kronos, the dominion of the sky, and it marks the real beginning of Jupiter's dominion. And to end this long tale, this is told in allegorical form in the tale of the wanderings of Adam, the myth of man. Adam, traveling through all 7 earths, is a transparent allegory of the physical and human history of Earth. Midrash Rabbah to Genesis. Exodus, Ginsburg Legends 1. Zohar Ruth, and other sources in Ginsburg Legends 5. It is said that the place where the tower once stood retains the peculiar quality of inducing a total loss of memory in anyone who passes it. Really? The Native Races, San Francisco, 1882, H. Bancroft. The electrical convulsive therapy used in psychiatry for the treatment of certain mental cases is administered by passing current through electrodes on the forehead. Shock treatments conducted through the brain. The electric discharge causes a period of confusion and subsequent complete, though temporary, loss of memory of the events immediately preceding the discharge. A number of patients complain also of consequent disturbances of longer duration, and some of them suffer a patchy retrograde amnesia. See Siskind in Archive of Neurological Psychiatry, Chicago, 1941. That's why I like to read the footnotes, because there can be as much information there, if not more, than the article or the book.